All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming out. And it is quite early, so I commend you for being here at this hour. And also for the fact that it does have a vendor's name on the session, so you never know what you're going to get when you come to a vendor talk at one of these conferences. So hopefully, rather than a sales pitch, this is really tools that you guys can use on your project. So I hope this is very useful for you. Everything I'm showing today is completely free, so there's no reason to get out your checkbooks, no matter how compelling my content might be. Just just relax. You can use it all free of charge. So I guess for starters, just to introduce myself, I'm Jeff Potts. I lead up the Alfresco community, and I'm also I lead up a little project on Apache Chemistry called CMIS Lib. And I'll mention that probably later. But I work for Alfresco, and Alfresco is something that I've been working with since 2005 or 2006, right when Alfresco got started. And I just want to spend some time talking about what is Alfresco, because not everyone in the room may know, so I'll give a brief overview of that. And then I'll go right into why you shouldn't roll your own content repository, and which Alfresco is a content repository. And so I'll be presenting, the case for using something like Alfresco or Alfresco specifically instead of going your own way for storing content in your content applications. Then this morning we are announcing the public Alfresco API. So I will show you how to get started with the API, how to sign up for an API key, how to hit our API with a REST client and some Java code. Then I'll do a small, brief sidebar into the CMIS standard, Content Management Interoperability Services, because I think that's an important standard that even if you take nothing else away from this talk and you decide Alfresco isn't going to be a good fit for you, you should at least be looking at CMIS for your content application projects. And then I'll give you a few guidelines and tips, and then hopefully at the end I'll leave some room for questions. Okay, so what is Alfresco? Alfresco is an open source content repository. We're an ECM platform. We're available on premise, so you can install us on your own servers. We can be installed in your cloud infrastructure. So if you have cloud infrastructure on whatever cloud that is, you can install us there. Or if you would just rather us run the servers, we have a multi-tenant SaaS offering of Alfresco. It's the same software in all those cases. And so if you want to just sign up and use Alfresco in the cloud, you can do that. Now, so it's one platform running in lots of different places, wherever you feel like you want to run it. And then one API for your applications to leverage. So you don't have to learn a bunch of different APIs. You can learn one API, and what's really cool is that it's CMIS based, so it's based on an industry standard, and we'll talk more about that here in a little bit. Now, one of the things that we're seeing is that obviously people are rolling out tablets like crazy across their organizations, and so we really feel like Alfresco can be a content hub for those tablets. So tablets aren't much use if you don't have great content on them, and Alfresco can be used to control that content and deliver it out to all of your devices, whether it's desktops, laptops, or mobile devices. Now, we're a commercial open source company, and so we have 2,200 enterprise customers. This is for the on-premise version of our software. 2,200 enterprise customers. Those are across 66 countries, millions of users, and billions of documents being managed. I always kind of laugh at this line. It's like the McDonald's used to have the exact number of hamburgers it's sold. So it's like every time we make the slide, we have to increase it. And then finally, at some point, we'll just give up and we'll just say billions of documents. It's a lot of documents. Benefits. So for end users, I already mentioned this. Your end users can get to their content on any device with any content tool anywhere that they happen to be. So if someone's sitting in a call with a customer and they need the latest sales presentation, they can get that. And you can be assured that that is the latest and greatest sales presentation. as just an example. For an organization, like an IT organization or just the organization as a whole, you can manage and control your content, make sure it's secured, make customizations, you can integrate that content with workflow. I mean, I think this is what sort of sets us apart from things like Dropbox and other sort of consumer-grade file sharing tools, where I think all of us have probably seen our content sort of slipping out of the borders of our companies because they're being shared on these consumer tools. And I know some of you, your organizations have probably blocked those tools, but in a lot of cases, people are taking critical content and putting them out there on those tools, and it may be exposing you to risk. And then for developers, it's one standards-based API, which I've already mentioned, but I think it's important because as you know, I'm a former content management consultant, so every time I would walk into a client and do a project, I would come across another content management system. And in fact, according to AIM, which is an ECM industry association, 72%, I think, of large organizations have 3 or more content repositories in their organization. I see some heads nodding. I mean, I think a lot of people in here, you probably have Documentum and you have SharePoint and, maybe some of you have Alfresco and, it just keeps going on and on. You have a lot of different repositories. So as a developer, it's a drag, right? Having to write all these one-off integrations for every time someone wants the similar app to integrate with another repository. So having one standards-based API that you can learn and write against is important. So how do we deliver this? First off, open source. So all of our source code, 100% available to you as a developer. Again, as a former consultant who's run into problems with software, there can be bugs from time to time in the software, and your client doesn't really care, right? The customer doesn't really care. They want you to fix the problem. So what do you do when you're running a Documentum or a SharePoint? How do you debug the vendor's software code? You can't do it. I mean, you can decompile their code and things like that, but it's a drag. So for me, when I made the switch to open source, that was a huge thing. Just being able to step through Alfresco's code line by line and looking for those problems and fixing those problems was a major productivity boost for me. Open standards, we'll talk more about CMIS in a bit, but I just think it's important to have a content repository that plays well with others, that actually leverages these open standards that exist. Choice. Some people, it's okay to them that they have to run on a Microsoft operating system, that they have to use a Microsoft database, that they have to use a Microsoft application server, that they have to use a Microsoft browser. Some people, that's fine. To me, that drives me nuts. I want to have choice up and down the stack. I want to run on Linux, right? I want to run against MySQL. I want to use Chrome or I want to use Firefox in the browser. I want to run on Tomcat. So Alfresco is all about choice and freedom so that you can deploy in the way that makes sense for you. Okay, a few random examples. So I think you're getting the fact that we're an open source content management repository. How are people using Alfresco? These are truly a grab bag of just random use cases. Contract creation. People want to create a contract. They might want to reuse clauses from old contracts that have been successful in the past or something like that. So I want to search across those and find those. Press request. So I did a little project for a video game company in the area who a press company calls them up and says, hey, we want some screenshots of that video game. Well, in my naive head, I was thinking, well, someone probably just takes a quick screenshot and sends it off to the person that asked for it. Actually, what happens is there's this huge workflow, a business process that happens within the video game publisher, where the request goes to marketing and it goes to communications and it goes to the art department and it goes to the engineers, and finally there's a set of screenshots that get produced that's specifically made for that publication, and those get delivered back to the publication. And you can do something like that easily with Alfresco. Boardroom collaboration. So this might be B2B collaboration. We have some content we need to work with other companies that we're partnering with, and we want to share content. Field sales, I already mentioned. Customer file sharing. So maybe you're in professional services. You've got PowerPoints. You've got architecture diagrams. You've got prototypes, mock-ups, screenshots, invoices, things like that you need to share with your customers. So Alfresco can be used to do that. even university course guide publishing. So I went down to Johannesburg and met with a university down there, and all of their packets, they're like in my day, you had to go get a packet from Kinko's for a class, and it was like you went and got a bunch of copies that were like this thick. And now you go in and all that stuff is ebooks basically, and that's all gets compiled by the teachers and turned into an ebook, and in some cases it gets printed. But that all happens through Alfresco for this particular university. So this obviously is not a complete list. The fact is that anytime you have content, lots of files that you're dealing with, you need something like a content repository to be able to deal with those files. People want to know, what is the latest and greatest file? They don't want to see the file name that says POTS, contract, final, signed, V3, in review, draft. You guys have all done that probably, where you're just, people are using the file name to try to store metadata about the file. It's like crazy. Or where is the expense report that I submitted? What is the process, and where is that? It's fallen into a black hole. How come I can't get reimbursed for the awesome dinner that Joe and I had at that fish place last night? That was great. So why can't that be approved? And so a content repository can help you answer those questions. Latest and greatest, what version of the document is this? Is this in a business process? And if so, what step is it in? Now, we're all developers. A common response to this problem when a customer comes to you and says, I need to work with this content in a more sane way, a common response is like Ryan Gosling here, hey, let's grab a framework, let's grab a relational database, let's knock this baby out, we'll have a nice custom app, it'll work exactly the way we want to. And I'm just saying, not so fast, Ryan. There's a few things to think about before you go off and try to write one of these yourself. And I have to always look at this slide because I always want to call him James Gosling. That's a different guy entirely. It might be actually funnier to put his face up there instead of Ryan Gosling's. But anyway, so do-it-yourself content repositories. Relational, not a good idea. Why? Relational is great for text and numbers, but when you start putting binary data into a relational database, you're liable to have problems, like size limits. You cannot put massively huge files into a database. Most databases have limits to that. Random seek. So maybe you have videos that you want to stream out of your repository, and it's really tough to do that out of a database. They're just not built to do that. Or search. So not all databases can actually full text index the blobs that are in the database. You need something like a content repository to be able to do that. So there may be small applications where it makes sense to stick your content into the database, but in most cases it actually doesn't make sense. And you might be curious to know, I'm sure there are a lot of people in here that have SharePoint in their organization. SharePoint actually does stick their content into the database, and that's why in a lot of cases SharePoint can be limited in extremely large rollouts. All right, so let's say that you say, all right, Jeff, we get it. We're not going to put our files on the database. Let's move on. All right, well, once you do that, you have to think about some of these other features or function points that are going to be in your content-centric applications. So a security framework, search, as I already mentioned, a workflow engine, doing transformation, so going from like a Word document to a PDF, or going from a GIF to a PNG, or different types of transformations, or even looking at that data, those files, and extracting data out of those files as they're added to the repository. WebDAV, CIFS, even the SharePoint protocol, which we've implemented so that you can actually use the nice Office integration that has with SharePoint, but then tell it, hey, I'm using SharePoint, wink, wink, and you're really using Alfresco behind the scenes, and then that Office integration continues to work. So, what I'm trying to tell you here is that your applications that you write that deal with a lot of files may not use all of these, may not have a need for all these features, but I bet that there are a lot of these features up here that you will need to use. And are there open source components out there in the wild that do some of these things? Actually, there are. If you want to go do metadata extraction, there's a great library called Apache Tika, which you can go grab, and that'll extract metadata out of all kinds of binary files. And that's awesome. If you want to do scheduled jobs in your application, there's Quartz. Quartz is a great library. But when you want to do all of these things, you have to go grab all those, pull them together, and you have to ask yourself at some point, what have we just done? What have we done? We have created this badass vehicle that can float in the lake and it can drive down the road, but when I take this down to NTB or the mechanic and try to get some work done, they're going to look at me like I'm crazy. Like, I don't even know where to find the hood on this thing. Like, I don't even know. So people are doing this today with content repositories. They're building their own content repository, sometimes over a period of years, and then they're looking back on it and going, okay, we sort of built a car boat here, and actually the people that originally built the car boat don't even work here anymore, and now this code is expensive to maintain, it's breaking left and right, and no one knows how to work on it, it's not standard. So the solution, as you probably have already figured out that I may propose, is to use Alfresco. Use Alfresco as a content platform. We're open source. It's free. Just go grab it and start using it. You kind of have to be crazy not to be rolling your own car boat when you can get our car boat. Ours isn't a car boat. It's standard, but you can come get our platform and start using it in your own application. So let's talk a little bit more about this, and then we'll get to the API. So basically, I've already shown that you can use Alfresco on your web browser, in your mobile devices, and then what you're doing is you're sitting on top of a repository. That repository is either running on-premise in your data center, or it's running in the Alfresco cloud, or it could be running in your own cloud, but we'll just consider that on-premise for the purposes of this diagram. And then in the middle, you've got an Alfresco API. So you've got these applications, they're hitting the Alfresco API, and those are hitting on-premise or cloud. All right, we've also recently announced a synchronization. So I'll just briefly say that if you have content on-premise and you want to carve off a piece of that content and share it with people outside the firewall, one option is you call up IT and you say, hey, can I get a VPN connection? And can you add my partners into the LDAP directory? And can you make sure they can get in securely? And they're going to be like, yeah, 3-4 months, or they're going to tell you no, or it's not going to happen. So what you can do is you set up an Alfresco Cloud instance. You take that folder in your repository and you say, hey, let's share this with our partners. Boom, you replicate that stuff out to the cloud, and then you invite them to the cloud, and now you can collaborate on that content in a secure way. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. What I want to talk about is the repository, the services that wrap around that repository, and then the API. We'll get some code examples running here in a second. So the repository, what is that thing? It's a collection of typed nodes. It's a hierarchical collection of typed nodes. So what's a node? A node is like a folder or a document, or it could be a business-specific type, like a contract or a resume. Those are all node types. And these nodes may have content associated with them, right? So a content stream. So if I have a resume, this resume object is sitting in the repository, and that actual PDF or Word doc that is the resume is sort of attached to that node. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we don't put the files in the database. We put the files on the file system. So that means there's no limit as to the size of those files. The only limit is the underlying limits of your file system. Then the metadata that we store with these nodes goes into a database. And then you as a developer just say, hey, give me an object. And we hand you the object, and it has the metadata on it. You can say, hey, object, give me your content stream. Boom, here comes the content stream, and that's the actual binary file that's associated with it. So we have nodes, we have metadata associated with those nodes. Everything is secured, so you can secure it down to the user and group level. And everything is searchable. So if we can read that content somehow, we will index that content. We use Lucene under the covers. In Alfresco 4, we can now use Solr. So if you'd rather split out your index and sort of scale that out separately, you can do that with Solr. So that's the repository. Now, here are some of the services that wrap around that, because you can go out and grab a repository that's not a database, right? There are repositories out there. But the services really add value to that and really, I think, distinguish Alfresco. So first off, workflow. It's not often that you're just creating files for the heck of it, right? Those files that you're creating and collaborating on go through some sort of process. They're collaborated on with people around your organization. And that business process can often be codified into a workflow that runs within a state engine, basically. Activity is an open source workflow engine that you can actually use in your non-Alfresco related or non-content related projects. So if you have a Java application and you need to manage business processes and manage state, you should go look at activity.org and check that out. It's a BPMN, which is a business process standard. It's a BPMN 2.0 compliant workflow engine that's completely open source. So we've taken that and embedded it within Alfresco. So if you need to route your documents through a workflow, you can do that using activity. We've got transformation. So I've already mentioned earlier some transformations, Office documents, images, videos, and so on. Rules. These are triggers that you can set so that when your end users can actually configure these rules so that when some condition is met, then something happens. Maybe we want to set up a rule that says anything that goes into this folder is always going to have a PDF rendition created. Or anytime someone deletes something out of that folder, I want to copy it over to my archive or something like that. So these are little rules that our end users can create. And you can add your own actions as a developer. You can just write some Java code to create those actions. You can sort of create a library of actions that your end users can then sort of compose into to meet their own needs. And then they don't have to get you involved every time they want to do something similar to that. All right, API options. So if you are customizing Alfresco, then you will likely be using Java. Our foundation API is Java. We deploy as a WAR file into any servlet container. Tomcat is the most common one that we see, but others are supported. We also have server-side JavaScript going on in a lot of our things. So that can be an API option, is server-side JavaScript. Then if you're talking to Alfresco remotely, so you're not running in the same process, then you need a remote API. And there's one called CMIS, which is an industry standard, and that uses Atom REST or SOAP. So there's two different bindings there. It's up to you whether you want to interact with it in a RESTful way or using web services. So that's one option. And then the other option is something that we call web scripts. Web scripts is a simple model view controller implementation, and basically you just define your own URLs and you associate that with some controller logic. That controller is written either in Java or JavaScript, server-side JavaScript, and then you have some views that are written in FreeMarker. But what I want to talk about today is the Alfresco Cloud API. We're launching this today. It's a public API which allows you to use CMIS and Alfresco REST to work with Alfresco in the cloud. So if you're writing mobile apps, if you're writing cloud apps, desktop apps, any kind of apps where you want to help users work with the content that they've stored out in the cloud, you can do that with the Alfresco Cloud API. And we've launched that this morning, and everyone can go get signed up as a developer, and I'll show you how to do that momentarily. So what are we announcing? It's a public API for Alfresco in the cloud. It's based on CMIS, so if you are already familiar with CMIS, you're already going to know how to use the Alfresco public API, so that's pretty awesome. Then we are also announcing the availability of Alfresco, an Alfresco mobile SDK. We have a native iOS application. It's also open source, so if you want to do some iOS development to help people work with their content, either in Alfresco Cloud or on the repository, you can go grab our mobile app from Bitbucket and go to town. But what this is a set of SDKs that help you work with the Alfresco API. And they basically just wrap the cloud API. So you could start today doing mobile apps. In fact, I'll show you a screen in a minute of some of our launch partners who have done just that. But if you wait until, probably should be no later than the end of October, we'll have the SDK for both iOS and Android to just help you do that kind of development. All right, so really this is just what I was just saying, but in a picture instead of words. So half of the API is CMIS, so you're going to have Atom Pub XML going back and forth, and half of the API is Alfresco REST, which you'll have JSON going back and forth. Now, this is, I'd rather have JSON across the board here. And coming in the next version of CMIS, they have a browser binding, which is JSON. And so once that happens, then this will be better to deal with. But right now, what happens when you use the Alfresco API, when you're working with documents, folders, and access control lists, and other things that the CMIS spec covers, you'll be using AtomPub XML. And when you're using things that CMIS doesn't cover, you'll be using REST. And I'll show an example of this in a second. It's not as confusing as it sounds, but it's just that you have to realize that that's one API, but two sort of faces to that API. Okay, so we're launching today, and we have a few folks who had early access to the API, and so they are working to integrate their applications with our API as we speak. Probably rather than showing you kind of who they are, I'll kind of show you what they do so you can get a feel for sort of some use cases. So on the left is an application called PDF Pin, and this application helps you annotate PDFs on your mobile device. And so in this case, why they're integrating with us is because people have a lot of PDFs that are sitting in the Alfresco cloud. And so this application helps you work with those PDFs. Here is an application from MoPrize. MoPrize helps you be more productive in meetings. So basically, you go grab a collection of documents out of the Alfresco cloud, and you say, let's have a meeting about these documents. And then it gives you a user interface to work with those. And then on the bottom is Otixo, I think that's how you say it. And they basically just help you organize and gather up all the files that you have stored in different cloud services, Alfresco Cloud being one of them. And so it has a baby on it. I couldn't resist for no other reason. I just had to put the slide up there because it's a cute slide. All right, well, enough sort of convincing you that this is an awesome idea. Let's just see how this works. So the first thing is I want to show you just a snapshot of the Alfresco Cloud API, or the Cloud User Interface, so you can see what this looks like. So I would go to, if you don't have an Alfresco Cloud account, you can go to cloud.alfresco.com. You can sign up for an account. I'm going to go to my Alfresco.com, which is where I'll go to actually log in. And I'll just log into my real cloud account here. So we use our own stuff, like I'm organizing our developer conference, and this has been perfect for getting speaker slides and things like that from all my speakers that don't work for Alfresco. So when I log in, this is what I see. I can see a list of the content that I'm currently working on. I can see a list of the sites that I belong to. A site is really just a collection of folders that sort of have a logical meaning, like the developer conference might be a site. In my case, Alfresco API demo is a site. And then I can see an activity stream, so I can see what people are doing, what documents they've commented on, documents they've modified, etc. And if I have any tasks that are waiting on me, little workflows that are running, then those tasks will be shown here. So let's go into the Alfresco API demo site and go into the document library here. And we can see that it's a set of folders, and within these folders I can have documents. And what we'll do is we'll use the API to stick some documents into the folders here. I always like looking at my browser to see what I've been searching for recently. Does anyone else have to constantly look up the get push syntax? Does anyone here use get? Like, I'm an SVN person, so every time I want to push something. So anyway, it just caught my eye. Had to call it out. So let's go in here and do some run some Java code. So I've pumped up the font, so I hope that in the back it's readable. All this code that I'm showing, I've already uploaded to Google Code. So and I'll have a link to it at the end, and the slides will be on SlideShare, and Oracle will be putting them somewhere. So you can get a link to all this. Also, the demos that I'm showing, I've already recorded as screencasts and put those on YouTube. So if you want to see the demos again, you can just get them on YouTube. I also did that as a backup in case there was a problem with the network. It's always a good idea to have belt and suspenders. So anyway, I'm digressing, and I have a tendency to do that. So let's look at a simple example which will hit the Alfresco API to find my home network. A network means when you join Alfresco Cloud, you sort of claim your domain as your network. So alfresco.com is my network because that's what I've joined the Alfresco Cloud as. If you have, furrykittens.com. When you join the cloud, Furry Kittens will be your network, and all the other people that work at Furry Kittens will be part of the Furry Kittens network. And then you can invite others to collaborate with you, but that's what a network is. So let's run a call to find my home network and then find the sites that I can see that are in my network. I'm using the Google OAuth 2 client. In fact, I think it might be an older version of the OAuth 2 client, but we use OAuth 2 for authentication against the Alfresco cloud. You can use whatever OAuth client you want to. It doesn't matter to us. I just went and grabbed one. So I'm going to not show you the details of that. I'll tell you in a minute how OAuth 2 works, but I'm going to avoid the details and just show you what these calls are like. So I'm grabbing a URL, API Alfresco.com, and we are going to build a GET request out of that, and then we're going to parse what comes back, the JSON that comes back, and I have just some POJOs set up to represent the objects that come back. And then we're going to dump those out to sysout, because I was too lazy to use a real logging framework. All right, so let's run this. And the first thing that's going to happen is, this is a command line example, but that application is starting up a little Jetty server, and so that I can have a callback URL, because OAuth requires a callback URL. So I'm just, I have a little callback URL that's in this little Jetty server. So what's happening is I've asked Alfresco for authentication, and Alfresco is coming back and saying, hey, Jeff, this application, Java 1 demo, is trying to access your cloud account. And is that okay? Well, yeah, I mean, it would be a pretty short demo if I didn't grant that access. So let me just grant that access. All right, cool. So access has been granted. Let's pop back over here into Eclipse. And now we can see that we grabbed an access token. We found a network. My home network is alfresco.com, and then it dumped out 10 sites that I can see in my Alfresco network. Now, you might be wondering what that JSON that comes back looks like. So I'm going to grab this access token, and I'm going to pop into Chrome, because Chrome, you know, I'm sure there are some with Firefox, but I just happen to come across this dev HTTP client, which kind of has a nice look and feel. So I'm going to add the bearer token into my authorization header, and then I'm going to issue a GET against that api.alfresco.com. And what we can see now is the raw JSON that comes back. So this is a good way to test and work with the Alfresco REST API, is to just go grab an HTTP client and just start putting the URLs up there and make sure that you've got a bearer token from the OAuth response, and then you can see the JSON that comes back. So in this case, I'm getting networks back, so it gives me a pagination object that tells me how many objects were there, whether I have more, so I can page through them, and then gives me the entries. In my case, there's just one entry, alfresco.com, and if I scroll down to the bottom, I can see that the home network is set to true. I can see when it was created, whether it's a paid network, my network subscription level, and stuff like that. So that is a simple case of hitting the REST API. So I showed you a little bit about the Cloud API. I'm not going to show mobile today, but in the interest of time. If you want to see our mobile app, just come by the booth and we can give you a demo of that. So what do you do if you want to go ahead and start and sign up and start playing with this API? It's easy to sign up, and it's completely free. So you can go to developer.alfresco.com and click register as a developer. You can do this even right now if you want to. Give a first name, a last name, an email address, a password. Read the terms and conditions in great detail. Then click I accept the terms and conditions and click register now. You'll get an email. You confirm your account, and then you'll be in. So let me show you what that looks like. So I'm going to log in using my credentials. And let me go to my application list. So you can have as many applications as you want. I have 3 apps set up right now. I have a Java app, a Python app, and a Grails app. And what you do is you can just click Add Application, and give it a name, tell us whether you're using Java, Python, or something else. It doesn't matter to us. It's just good information for us to have. And then you click over to auth. Here, I'll do a... Oh yeah, you have to tell it that you're using the Alfresco public API. We may add more APIs to that over time. And then you have to give it a callback URL. So in my case, I'm using the loopback IP address and then /callback, and that's all there is to it. So now once I save this, there's my app. Now I can go in here and grab the secret, the key, the auth key, and the secret. And then I just put those wherever my OAuth client expects them. So in my case, using the Google OAuth client, I have a little class here called OAuth2 client credentials. And so my client ID and my secret just go right in there as constants. I think in the newer version of the OAuth client, you put it in a JSON file, but it's effectively the same thing. And so that's all there is to it, to running the hitting the Alfresco API. Okay, so how many people are already doing OAuth to sort of interactions with their apps that they're writing? Anyone in here? No? Okay. It's actually, once you find a library that you like, it's actually pretty easy. But basically what's going on is, I just showed you how to sign up for a key. You're going to get a key and a secret. You'll then put those in your app. You'll invoke our authorized URL. This will cause the application to ask the user to grant permission to use your app. The user sees that grant. They grant you permission. This then redirects back to your callback URL. Your application catches that redirect, and in that redirect, there's a little code that comes back. You grab that code, then you exchange the code for an access token, and you'll get back an access token with an expiration. Now, once you have that, you're off to the races. You can issue as many API calls as you want to. Eventually, what happens is that access token expires. And so you then have to just refresh the token. So that's just a call, again, a call to Alfresco to refresh the token, and you continue on as you normally would. So these details are actually hidden from you when you use something like Google's OAuth client. You really just have to know, where do I put my API key, where do I put my secret, and what is the authorization URL, and what is the token URL. And if you have those things, it's no big deal. I already showed you how to hit the REST API, and that'll work with any REST client. And again, all you need is you have to have that token that comes back from all that OAuth interchange. You have to put that in the header, which is what the OAuth client is doing for you on your behalf. All right. So I mentioned that the API consists of two parts, the REST API and the CMIS API. So the REST API is used for sites. So if you want to get a list of a user's sites, if you want to find out who the members of that site are, if you want to find out what favorite sites a member has, you can do all that with the REST API. Networks, we talked about. You can get the details of that person's account or people's account. You can find the containers. A container is just a folder. So what are the folders that are in a given site? You can get the activity stream. You can find and create ratings on folders and comments. You can create comments on documents, and you can tag things. So those are the things that get covered by the REST API. Now that's the initial thing that the API covers, and we'll expand this over time. So for example, we were talking about workflows earlier. Today you cannot, from the API, trigger a workflow in the Alfresco cloud. And that's something that we'll likely see changed in the next version. You can't trigger those transformations that happen. You can do those with rules in the Alfresco cloud, but you can't do those from the API just yet. So workflow and transformations are two things that I think we will see added to the API fairly quickly. All right, so I talked about CMIS earlier, and I told you that it was important even if you don't want to use Alfresco. So let me give you a few bullets on that, because I do think it's an important standard. and it'll help you use the Alfresco API if you decide to do that. So it stands for Content Management Interoperability Services. It is a language-independent, vendor-neutral API. It's managed by Oasis. So Oasis is a standards body, and they own the CMIS standard. And basically, it helps you create, read, query, update, delete nodes in a repository like Alfresco. Now, you might be thinking, well, is this not an Alfresco only thing? Because if it is, is that really, can we call that an industry standard? Well, CMIS is backed by Alfresco, Documentum, Microsoft, IBM, so FileNet, actually both flavors of FileNet. I don't know, IBM has like 10 different content management systems, but 2 flavors of FileNet support CMIS. SharePoint supports CMIS. I'm not sure what Oracle's status is on CMIS, but I don't know if someone in the room knows, they could educate me. But basically, the big heavy hitters in content management have CMIS implementations. So it's not just an Alfresco thing. So it's creating nodes, it's doing check-ins and checkouts, setting up relationships between nodes, managing the access control lists, doing queries, traversing the repository. So the nice thing, again, going back to the sort of frustrated content management consultant story, is that you can choose the front end that works for you. You don't have to use your vendor's proprietary, SDK for building user interfaces on top of their repository. Choose what works for you, and then write against the CMIS API, because you know that will work for any CMIS repository. Alfresco, there's a Jackrabbit bridge to CMIS, SharePoint, whatever. So this is a big deal because it's like SQL was in '92 for relational developers, because before that happened, people had to write to a specific database because everyone had their own flavor of SQL. Then SQL was standardized, and as developers, we could write an app once and be relatively assured that it would work against multiple relational databases. And so this is sort of a duh moment for most people, but in the content management space, being able to write an app one time and have that app work regardless of where someone chooses to persist their data is actually a really cool deal. So all the CMS geeks are excited about CMIS. Now there's a reference implementation for the standard, and that's housed in the Apache Chemistry project. So if you're doing anything with CMIS, you should go to chemistry.apache.org, and there you can find a bunch of related CMIS projects. So if you're a Java developer, which I assume, if not, newsflash, you're at the wrong conference, but if you're a Java developer, there's OpenCMIS or OpenCMIS, and so you can grab a client there. You can also grab a reference server. So if you want to just grab a little in-memory CMIS server and run that on your laptop and check it out, then you can do that. If you're a Python fan like I am, then you can grab CMIS Lib and you can do Python stuff, and there for all those other languages that we prefer not name, there are libraries for those as well. Shameless plug, I'm writing a book with 2 other guys, one from IBM and one from SAP, on CMIS and Apache Chemistry. So if you want to learn how to write applications with CMIS, you can grab this book from Manning. It's available in MEEP, which is like the early access program. So you can go grab the book and have the chapters as they're written. So we're about a third of the way through the book. Right. So CMIS, I just talked about it. Why don't I show you how it works? So let's jump back over to Eclipse, and let's run a little example that will find a folder, find a container. So that requires a REST call, and then create a folder in that folder. So that's a CMIS call, and then do a like on that folder. So now that's back to the REST side. And then create a document, so that's a CMIS call, and then create a comment on that document, so that's a REST call. So remember that I said that the API is 2 parts, Alfresco REST and CMIS, and so this example is going to sort of interleave calls to each of those just to show you kind of how that works. So let's run it first, and then we can look at the code if we're interested. So let's go ahead and fire this off. Now, notice that it's asking me to grant permission again, even though this is the exact same application. When your OAuth client returns a credential, if you persist that credential, that won't happen. You can just, once someone's granted access to your app and you store that credential, you can just keep letting them hit your app. So I just haven't persisted the credential anywhere. So every time I run my example, it's going to ask me that again. All right, so access token, we created a folder. Here's the object ID of the folder. We did a like on that folder. We created a document. There's the object ID of that document. And then we commented on that document. So if I pop over to Firefox and go into the document library and refresh this, so now we're in Alfresco running in the cloud. Here's the test folder I just created. You can see it's got a like on it. And if I open up this test folder, then there's the PDF that I just checked into the repository. And if I pop open this PDF, it'll preview it. It's not a very exciting PDF, but if it were a large PDF, you can see that it would be nice to allow people to page through that PDF without having to download it. We can preview all kinds of media. That's just a PDF example. And I have an example that sets metadata. Mine didn't really set any metadata to speak of here. But then here's a comment that we've placed on the document. So these are simple examples, I know, but these are the building blocks for building some of those apps that I showed you earlier, the PDF annotation app or the cute babies that I have pictures of app or whatever app it is. You can build those apps using these simple concepts. If we go back over here, we can see how to, like, let's look at a create folder example. I'll just pop into that. So we are grabbing a folder object. So I guess I should back up and say that what comes in to this method is a parent folder ID. So where do you want me to create this new folder? And then I ask CMIS to get me an object using that object ID. And then we're going to try to create the folder. So when I increase my font, I have some indentation issues here. So ignore those. So I am trying to get the folder. And if the folder exists, I'll just return that folder. If I can't find the folder, that means we need to create the folder. So to create the folder, we just need a hash map of properties. And so we will tell it that its type is CMIS folder. So this CMIS folder is kind of the lowest level of folder you could create. And in the on-premise version of Alfresco, you could extend that to be your own types of folders. In the cloud, right now, you have to live with the metadata that we have, the content model in the cloud. But at some point, we'll allow you to extend that. So if you wanted to have a folder that's, annual report folder or something, then you'd put your type there. Then I'm setting the name, and then I'm just calling create folder, and I'm passing the props in. So I create the folder, get the folder back, and then looks like I'm echoing back the folder ID and then returning the folder. So, I mean, that's a simple example. This uses Open CMIS, available from Apache Chemistry, combined with the Google OAuth client, and you can do this in the cloud. The interesting thing is that because this is CMIS and because Alfresco on-premise is also CMIS, this same code, minus the OAuth stuff, will work against Alfresco on-premise. So, it's nice to have one API to worry about. Okay, I want to get through a few of my slides towards the end here, and then let you ask questions if you have questions. So a few things to consider. First off, we're going to rate limit the request to the Alfresco API. So we have two plans, a developer plan and a production plan. They're both free. It's just a way to tell us when you're moving into production so we can get a heads up. So the developer plan is 5 requests a second, 10,000 requests a day. And the production plan is 50 requests a second and 100,000 requests per day. We are not limiting you on the number of applications that you create. You need to create the application, and then you'll probably deploy that application somewhere, and you want to keep the secret and the auth key secret. You don't want to put that in Google code or something. If you do compromise those secrets, you can always refresh them in our developer portal, which I'll do after this demo since I've shown my secret and my key to everybody here. The Alfresco Cloud users own their own content. So unlike some file sharing services that are out there that assert ownership over things that get put into their service, we don't assert that ownership. I think that's a nice thing that we do for our users. And just as a reminder to you as a developer, you don't own that content either. So if you write an application that helps users create and modify content that lives in the cloud, you're helping them modify their content. You're not helping them modify your content. So our users own their own content. OpenCMIS 080 snapshot is what I used in my demo. So if you want to do what I just did, you need to go grab the daily snapshot build of OpenCMIS. We're working on a stable build. I would imagine we're a week or 2 weeks out from having an 080 stable out. And then similarly on the Python side, 051 dev is basically a snapshot build is what you need. That's just because of the OAuth headers. Those had to be modified to accept that. All right, where should you get help? We have an Alfresco API forum, forums.alfresco.com. Some of us hang out in IRC when we're working, so in pound Alfresco on Freenode IRC. We have an Alfresco technical discussion Google group, so you can send questions there. Here are the links to the code that I showed. We didn't do any Python here just because I didn't think anyone would be interested. And you can also come by the booth with questions. So, Alfresco, open source, enterprise content management. It's a repository, services that wrap the repository, and then an API that wraps that. The API is standards-based. It's CMIS plus Alfresco REST, and you can go to developer.alfresco.com to register as a developer. So definitely go sign up for a cloud account, free 10 gigabyte cloud account to use as you see fit. If you need to have more users or more data, you can upgrade and pay us a subscription to do that. Then register your application at developer.alfresco.com and then participate in our community. I lead up the community. I want everyone in here to feel welcome in our community, to be able to ask questions, to be able to use our examples and our tools, and to help each other. And also, just a thing to remind you that we're having a developer conference in San Jose, November 14th and 15th. So if you want to come to that conference and talk to our engineers, talk to other people that are developing Alfresco apps, then you're more than welcome to join us in San Jose. We have a number of local meetups that happen around the world. There is a pretty active Bay Area meetup group. So if you want to just go to meetup.com and search, and you can probably find an Alfresco meetup in your area. If you don't find one, then you should start one and let me know, and I can help you do that. So these are some links I'll just leave here for you guys to get when you look at the slides. So I think we have a few minutes left for questions. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Yes?
So how might this work?
Yep. So Drupal is, we see a lot of people combining Drupal and Alfresco. And in fact, almost all of our public-facing websites are Drupal-based. So we love Drupal. And when CMIS first came out, I worked with some people to implement a module in Drupal called CMIS API. And that's there now. Whether that module will work with Alfresco in the cloud, it can work, it just may not work at the moment. So we would just need to modify it in the same way that we've modified those other libraries to work with OAuth. We would just need to modify that. But because it's CMIS-based and because the cloud API is CMIS-based, theoretically, that should work. So that would be a really cool thing to show. And we can, if you're interested in participating in making that work, then we could use the help. But so it should work is the answer. Anyone else? Yes?
One of the things that bothers me about what you described, we use Zythos, which is now something on the platform. It's used in education.
Yeah.
And it has the same thing with the way the documents are stored. They're in the file system, and then you've got metadata in a database. Our concern always is what happens if that database gets corrupted. Yeah,
it's a valid concern. So you have to, obviously you have to back that up, and you have to, when you're running on-premise, it's important to dump the database, then tar up the content store, and keep those in sync. So you have a valid concern, which is that if your database gets out of sync with your file system, then you have a corrupt repository. So people address that by doing backup procedures like the one I described, where they do full machine snapshots, or they can do other things to sort of to work with that. But you're absolutely right. It has to be kept in sync, or it's a problem.
File names with ISO are just like string numbers.
Yeah. Exactly. If you go look at where the files are stored on your file system when you install Alfresco, you'll see that we do the same thing. Our file system is not meant to be public. It's a hash directory structure, and then the attachments are all some GUID.bin is the name of the attachment. And so we don't expect anyone to hit that directly. We want you to always come through Alfresco to get to those files. Now we expose Alfresco. You can map Alfresco as a CIFS share. And so it appears to be a Windows share to end users, but really you're coming in through the API. You're never hitting those files directly. Anyone else? Yeah.
I know the activity workflow is fairly new to you guys.
Yep.
How far along is the integration?
We're there. We're in production. So Alfresco 4.0 was the first time we were using activity in production. And so that's there. So now when you install Alfresco 4 and higher using the binary installer, we default you to activity. JBPM is still there. So if you decide for whatever reason you want to use JBPM instead of activity, you can just configure it and say, I'm not using activity, I'm using JBPM, or you can use both. So it's completely there. We have a workflow service that, from an API perspective, there's a workflow service that sits in front of JBPM and activity. So a lot of the sort of API level stuff that you do is sort of abstracted into that workflow service. But yeah, it's fully integrated. And when you go look at the user interface and you start a workflow on something, that's activity. In fact, I didn't even mention it, but you can download, if you would rather run this on premise, you can go to Alfresco.com and you'll see a community link, and you can download Alfresco Community. It's LGPL v3, and so you can install that and use it as you see fit. And then we're hoping that at some point you'll want commercial support, and that's where we make revenue. Anyone else? Okay, well, thanks for your time this morning and your attention, and feel free to catch Joe or myself in the hallway, and we can answer questions, or join us at the booth anytime for the rest of the week, and we can show you some more details. I've got a couple more Alfresco API examples I could show. Other than that, thanks for coming.